one of the things Hitler started, it's a very strange story in many ways.
It's a very strange story, the Jordan Peterson story, because as Peterson has admitted, he's a very strange person. In 2017 and 2018, Jordan Peterson did 2 interviews with podcaster Ethan Klein. However, in January 2022, Klein took down the related videos, citing that he now realized Peterson was a gateway to alt-right extremism. In a tweet, Klein explained, "Years ago, I interviewed Jordan Peterson before I was very familiar with his politics. He was an interesting guest who I enjoyed sitting with, but, especially now, I can see he's a dangerous gateway to alt-right, transphobia, and COVID misinformation. I removed both interviews today." Right on schedule, Peterson flew into one of his narcissistic rages, taking umbrage with Klein's accusations and saying, "Finally, you might seriously consider providing me with the footage so I can post it, given that I agreed to appear on your show based on the agreement that there would in fact be a show. Also, I should warn you that those who engage in cancel culture generally live to regret it. I'm not going to come after you, except politely, in this Twitter stream, but the chickens will definitely come home to roost." Indeed, Peterson's chickens did come home to roost. A little Albertan farming metaphor for you there, meaning Peterson's online goon squad, for Jordan Peterson is the leader of a massive neo-fascist cult whose radicalized adherents badmouth anyone who opposes their Christ-like leader, churned out videos with titles like, "Ethan Klein tries to cancel Jordan Peterson and fails." Naturally, there were accusations of Klein having become woke, for example from Tim Pool, who the Southern Poverty Law Center describes as a pro-Trump social media personality and reactionary. Pool has defended the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys and urges his followers to buy weapons so they can protect themselves from the woke mob, who he says are coming to their homes with fireworks and guns. Which leads to the question, fireworks? The Peterson-Klein Twitter storm also prompted this video, made by none other than Gavin McInnes, founder of the Proud Boys, with whom Peterson has done an interview. Internet liberals chimed in as per usual, arguing that cancel culture does not exist, which is true, but beside the point, and Klein can do whatever he wants with his videos, which is also true, and also beside the point. And conservatives are so contradictory, which is at once correct, and a moot point if there ever was one. In short, the left came to Klein's rescue and defeated the alt-right with logic. Take that, alt-right. Stop trying to foment a race war and destroy democracy, and start being nice, or else we'll use more logic. Because if there's one thing we've learned from history, it's that fascism cowers in the face of reason and Enlightenment values. Yet again, the liberals weighed in on the Jordan Peterson phenomenon by talking about everything except the heart of the matter, Nazism. With Peterson, the subjects of cancel culture, contradictory conservative beliefs, him being a grifter, a tranquilizer addict, a bigot, a crackpot, a nasty bit of business, etc., are peripheral to the topic of understanding who Peterson is, a dedicated, lifelong adherent and proponent of Adolf Hitler and National Socialism. You see, for many liberals, Peterson couldn't be a Nazi, because a widespread online view holds that Nazi is merely an epithet hurled by liberals when they disagree with someone. Consequently, no one is a Nazi. No one can be a Nazi, and calling Nazis Nazis violates the internet dictum and is therefore out of bounds. Forget that Jordan Peterson, who really is a Nazi, routinely reveals that he's a Nazi whenever he starts blathering about Nazism, as he did in one of the interviews that Ethan Klein removed. Did anyone on the left think to discuss the content of the deleted videos to see if they contained endorsements for the so-called alt-right? Of course not. They were too busy reacting to Peterson's and Klein's fallout like a group of reason-wielding gossip columnists. When it comes to deciphering Peterson's Nazi signaling, the so-called woke left is fast asleep. Jordan Peterson has practically admitted to being a Nazi, for example when he told a reporter from Esquire magazine, "I have something in common with Nazis in that I'm opposed to the radical left, and when you oppose the radical left, you end up being part of a much larger group that includes Nazis in it." Of course, the much larger group that includes Nazis in it is the alt-right, the group that bothered Ethan Klein so much that he decided to do something about it. The following is a segment of one of the deleted videos, which I got from Jordan Peterson's website. Peterson named the clip "Ordinary Men, Psychopaths, and Hitler." Gosh, Out of some 4 hours of material, I wonder why he selected this 12-minute bit. The video will begin with Peterson and Klein discussing psychopaths. Jordan Peterson knows a lot about psychopaths, because he is one.
Do you think they're sociopaths to do that, or they're just like opportunistic people, or what's the difference?
Oh, you got to be... The real psychopathic types, they have no conscience. Like, you're there to be plucked.
You're an NPC in a video game, as it's been described.
Yeah, exactly. And they're relatively rare, and they do have to move around. And, they can be successful in extraordinarily corrupt environments for short periods of time, but it's just not a stable solution. I mean, I can give you an example.
Well, I'm curious, what do you think about, like, the high-ranking officers in the Nazi Party? Were these psychopaths that were thriving in an unstable, corrupt situation, or are these otherwise decent people that just got twisted up in the
well,
times,
some of the, well, there were a little of column A and a little of column B. Like there was certainly openings in the Nazi hierarchies for people who were compassionless and cruel and vengeful and all of that. The SS is a good example of that. But there's a great book that I would recommend to your listeners, to your viewers, called Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning. It's a great book, and it tracks the development of. So when the Nazis moved through Poland,
did you catch Peterson's slip? Ordinary Men, which he calls a great book, tracks the development of the ordinary men. That is, Unit 101 of the Third Reich's Order Police, which wasn't really a police squad, but rather a murder squad that slaughtered some 83,000 Jews. Browning plots the development of the men, not the regression of men into homicidal savages, but their development, something positive. However, Peterson became aware of his poor word choice, and now you will hear him reformulate his speech.
And it tracks the development of... So, when the Nazis moved through Poland, they left policemen behind to maintain order, let's say, but it was still under wartime. And
the order police were supposed to maintain order. Funny, that's almost exactly what Hitler said. Let's compare Peterson's and Hitler's speech. Peterson, when the Nazis moved through Poland, they left policemen behind to maintain order. Hitler, an organized squad of troops to maintain order. This similarity is not the product of coincidence. Maintain order is a euphemism meant to conceal the order police's true intentions. Hitler and Peterson used the same euphemism while discussing the same topic. Furthermore, this type of likeness is part of a disturbing pattern. In The Devil and His Due, How Jordan Peterson Plagiarizes Adolf Hitler, I document how Peterson, mostly in his writings, plagiarizes Hitler over 3,000 times.
Browning tracked the behavior of this one unit of policemen. They were all middle-aged guys, just typical middle-class, bourgeois guys.
As usual, Peterson is lying. Browning stresses that most of the so-called order police were working class, like Peterson's followers.
They'd grown up really before Hitler, so they weren't thoroughly indoctrinated like the Nazi youth, say. And they were sent to Poland. And their commander said, look, you guys, it's wartime, and there are traitors everywhere, and you're going to have to do some pretty horrible things here, but if you don't have to, you can go home if you think that's just too much. And none of them did. And you think, well, why not? They had the opportunity. But the reason was, well, they were comrades, let's say, in arms, so they had that esprit de corps thing going, and they were all thinking, well, I'm not going to run away and leave my colleagues to do all the dirty work. It's a war. And
they have a duty.
They have a duty, yeah.
They had a duty, yeah. Whenever Peterson talks about Unit 101's commander, he always omits his name and depicts him as an avuncular figure who basically said, look, lads, you don't have to butcher the children. You can go home if you'd like and ask your wife to make you a nice bowl of soup. On the Joe Rogan Experience, Peterson characterized the unnamed commander as humane. The humane Nazi commander was Wilhelm Trapp, who was executed by the Polish as a war criminal after being handed over by the British. In addition to being found guilty of war crimes, the humane Trapp was convicted of committing crimes against humanity. To restate, Trapp oversaw the murder of 83,000 innocent people. Peterson's downplaying the malevolence of a Nazi war criminal is no one-off. Later you will hear him say nice things about another Nazi war criminal, Adolf Eichmann. Oh, and by the way, when Peterson said members of Unit 101 were comrades in arms, and had an esprit de corps, he was plagiarizing Hitler, who wrote in Mein Kampf about the need for soldiers to be comrades in arms and exhibit an esprit de corps. Peterson quoted Mein Kampf in his best-selling book, 12 Rules for Life.
Okay, so fine. So, they started by rounding up all the Jews who were between 18 and 65, the men, and shipping them away. And they ended up by, this is rough. It's a rough book. They ended up, taking naked pregnant women out into the middle of fields and shooting them in the back of the head.
When Peterson said that the Nazis shot naked pregnant Jewish women, he looked at Ethan Klein's wife, who's from Israel and served in the Israeli military.
And so you think, well, how does a man transform in that manner?
How does a man develop in that manner? Or how can men be developed or brainwashed into transforming in that manner? This is a question Peterson has pondered for decades. How can ordinary men, like the hundreds of thousands of ordinary men who he counsels and commands, be encouraged to be psychopathic? And
Browning shows you, it's not pleasant. They went through psychological hell each step of the way, but they went. So lots of times it was ordinary men who went down the bad path one step at a time, and sometimes it was people who were rotten to the core, like the Minister of Propaganda or Mengele, the doctor. He was a sadistic psychopath of the highest order.
Dr. Jordan Peterson is talking about Dr. Joseph Mengele, who happily waited at the Auschwitz railhead day in and day out in order to personally select some 400,000 people to be sent to the gas chambers. During an interview on the Joe Rogan Experience, Peterson admitted that he too could have worked at Auschwitz, explaining that it was easy to envision himself taking someone who just got off a transport train and have them carry a 100-pound sack of wet salt from one side of the compound to the other. People don't like to picture themselves doing that because it's too frightening. But I know perfectly well that I could do that sort of thing, and maybe I could even enjoy it. What kind of person labels Nazi war criminals humane and says he could enjoy working people to death at a Nazi death camp? The answer rhymes with Nazi.
Is there a mastermind? It seems so complicated to transform an ordinary man, as the book says, into just someone who's willing to execute a pregnant, innocent woman. Is there a mastermind that plots the course of that, or is it just does it just happen naturally along with the objectives of the? How do they orchestrate something so complicated like that?
Well, the Germans were an organized people.
The Germans were an organized people. Because if you want to exterminate the other, you need to get organized. And get organized is a message Peterson repetitively extends to his followers. To be sure, Peterson has complimented the Nazi concept of organization so frequently that nobody has bothered to notice.
And one thing Hitler was good at was order. You look at that picture on the left-hand side. That's tens of thousands of people, all organized into basically perfect squares.
The Nazis weren't just organized, they were perfectly organized. Better still, they were organized by Adolf Hitler, who Jordan Peterson says was an organizational genius.
One of the things I've always thought about Hitler is that, people, you have to admire Hitler. That's the thing. Because he was an organizational genius. Hitler really didn't give out directives precisely. He sort of hinted at what he might want, and then his minions would get together and, lay out policies in accordance with what they thought were his wishes. And there's another book I would recommend called Eichmann in Jerusalem. And Eichmann was really the architect of the final solution in many ways.
Eichmann was the architect of the final solution, and the subtitle of Peterson's first book, Maps of Meaning, is The Architecture of Belief. Peterson claims the book is primarily about the Holocaust, which it is, only not in ways most people would think. It is a largely cryptic introduction to the benefits of National Socialism. For instance, the architecture of belief refers to the framework or mystical underpinnings of Nazi ideology. However, the volume's esotericism is occasionally replaced by frankness. For instance, when it asks, granted the opportunity, how many of us would not be Hitlers? Peterson would be a Hitler. To be certain, in addition to praising Hitler and replicating his speech, Peterson imitates Hitler's appearance and facial expression, dresses a little like Hitler while aping Hitler's gestures, as can be seen in this image, and this one, and publishes photos which look like photos disseminated by Nazi propagandists. In the next clip, you will hear Jordan Peterson say that Adolf Eichmann, who, remember, he just said was the architect of the final solution in many ways, was also in no way a psychopath. Be aware that in the book Peterson recommends, Eichmann in Jerusalem, Eichmann is quoted as saying, "I will jump into my grave laughing, because the fact I have the death of 5 million Jews on my conscience gives me extraordinary satisfaction."
And it's a characterological analysis of Eichmann, and Eichmann was in no way a psychopath. There's a story about him driving home after work one day and running over a cat and having like a terrible emotional reaction to it, you know? And it's not like his kids didn't love him, and and he wasn't out there actually killing people. He was just making the plans. He was the bureaucrat behind the scenes, and he was the sort of guy who had his mom do his laundry when he went off to the army, He was a faceless bureaucrat.
Peterson is plagiarizing Hannah Arendt because Peterson is a rampant plagiarist. While minimizing Eichmann's iniquity, Peterson says he was a faceless bureaucrat. Arendt writes that Eichmann was the faceless bureaucrat of death and represented the faceless nature of Nazi evil itself.
And he would have worked in any bureaucracy. He was worried about his next promotion. He wasn't thinking about the larger consequences. And that's Hannah Arendt, and that's a very classic book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, and that's very much worth reading if you're interested in this sort of thing.
One of the interesting things I always heard about the Nazis that really humanizes them in a way is that they were, and I might be wrong about this, but they were passing out alcohol to all the soldiers, especially those in the concentration camps, to keep them intoxicated all the time so that they could not confront the horrible things they were doing.
They had all sorts of they learned how to do it across time, right? I mean,
They learned how to do it across time. This is more praise, which is to say, Jordan Peterson is complimenting the Nazis for their ability to learn how to liquidate Jewish men, women, and children. I know. It's a very strange story in many ways.
It's a very strange story in many ways because Hitler was obsessed with order and cleanliness. He was a very orderly person. And he was very sensitive to disgust, because you think, well, the Nazis were afraid of the Jews, because they were other. And that's not right. What's more accurate is that especially Hitler, he was very sensitive to disgust. That's what it looks like. And if you're disgusted by something, then you want to eradicate it, right? If you're afraid of something, you want to run away from it. If you're disgusted by it, you want to burn it to the damn ground. You want to get rid of it.
You want to burn the Jews. You want to get rid of them. Again, Peterson is almost certainly channeling Nazi rhetoric because their preferred euphemism for murder the Jews was get rid of the Jews.
And his writings, like I read a book called Hitler's Table Talk, which was his spontaneous discussions during dinner time from 1939 to 1942. It's really another amazing book.
Among the things that make Hitler's Table Talk amazing is that it reveals the discombobulated rantings of a genocidal maniac who was diagnosed by the OSS as having borderline schizophrenia, a disorder Peterson routinely speaks about in ways that are obviously self-referential, which is to say, he has schizophrenia. I chronicle his schizophrenic descent in The Devil and His Due. Moreover, in Table Talk, we can see Hitler making polite conversation about all things mundane as his war machine wrecked Europe and 1.5 million Jewish children were in the process of being murdered, as was overseen in part by Eichmann, who, according to Peterson, was just your typical desk jockey and mama's boy.
And we had been doing some work inspired a bit by Jonathan Haidt, who's done a lot of work on disgust and the relationship between trait personality. And I was reading this book at the same time, and it was just unbelievable how often Hitler referred to the people he was eradicating, the Slavs and the Gypsies and the Jews and all the people he went after.
The Slavs, the Gypsies and the Jews and, all of them. You will have noted the dismissive waves of the hand and the complete lack of empathy with which Peterson made this remark. I repeat, he is a psychopath who possesses about as much human emotion as a reptile. He is Canada's most popular public intellectual and the world's biggest creep.
As parasites and as rats and as insects and all of that. So they were kind of put into that category. So, and here's a horrifying part of that story. Like when Hitler first came to power, he put in a lot of public health initiatives, including mass tuberculosis screening, which actually turned out to be a good thing. And at the same time, he went on a Beautify the Factories campaign.
Hitler did not launch massive public health initiatives such as TB screening or a Beautify the Factories campaign. Peterson is lying in an effort to make it seem as though Hitler was interested in health and safety. Peterson is a compulsive, inveterate, and well-practiced liar.
And so he convinced the German factory owners and so forth to increase the levels of hygiene in the factories, to get rid of the rats and the mice, to plant flowers out front, to make everything look neat and orderly. And the insecticide they used was Zyklon.
Again, this never happened. Zyklon was used in America to fumigate factories and so on, but not in Germany. Lying is part of the Nazi ethos, and Peterson wishes to emphasize that in Hitler, Germany had found a leader who wanted things to be neat and orderly.
Well, Zyklon, to eradicate the rats and the insects, Zyklon, a slightly different formulation, was the gas that was used in the concentration camps. And so Hitler went from cleaning up the rats and the mice in the factories and the insects, and then he went into the mental hospitals and started cleaning up in there, and then it just went broader and broader, again, sort of one step at a time. And the Germans had plenty of reason to be resentful and hateful because, think about what they went through. We can't even imagine it.
He's empathizing, not with the Jews, but with the people who murdered the Jews. The poor Germans, they suffered so much. Peterson omits the plight of the Belgians and French, whose countries the Germans invaded, and justifies the decision to exterminate millions of people who had nothing to do with German aggression, defeat, or the Treaty of Versailles. What Peterson is interested in most is the brutal murder of innocents, especially women and children.
First of all, there was World War I, and so there was many men, like Hitler himself, who served in the trenches. And there's one story about Hitler. He won a medal for heroism in World War I.
Hitler did not fight in the trenches, and although he won the Iron Cross twice, the award was handed out to over 5.4 million soldiers. Peterson has alluded to Hitler's medal and heroism at least 4 times, but he never mentions the heroism of the Allies, or anything about the Allies. Instead, he reformulates Nazi propaganda that Hitler was a heroic frontline soldier, when really he was a dispatch runner stationed several kilometers behind enemy lines. Peterson will go on to talk about how Hitler narrowly escaped getting blown up in the trenches. This never happened, but was a lie told by Hitler in the 1930s to make himself look heroic or special. In other words, Peterson's lie is a reformulation of Hitler's lie.
He was sitting around with a group of his buddies and went off to do something, God only knows what. And when he came back, they were all dead because a mine had, not a mine, I don't remember, some kind of shell had landed in the middle of them and killed them all. It's like, that changes you. And then afterwards there was all these brutalized men who'd come out of the trenches. You just can't imagine what it must have been like in the trenches, especially if you were there for like a couple of years.
Why doesn't Peterson spare a thought for the French or British who endured the hardships of trench warfare? And why doesn't he pay tribute to the Canadians?
You aren't the same person. Get out of there, you're unemployed, your country's in ruins. Then the hyperinflation hits, and every single person in Germany who ever saved any money at all is flat, bloody broke. And then there's a communist revolution brewing in Russia, and it's like, it's hell. And the Nazis came along and said, well, not only are we going to restore order and greatness, but we're going to bloody well tell you whose fault this is.
According to the Nazis, all of Germany's woes could be attributed to the Jews. They were at fault. They were responsible for the stab in the back.
And Hitler, I've studied him a lot trying to understand what happened. And Hitler was, Carl Jung called him the mouthpiece of the collective unconscious of the German people.
Note how he associates the subject of Adolf Hitler with Carl Jung. He does this often. Indeed, one of the reasons why Peterson likes Jung is because he lived through World War II and wrote extensively about Nazism. For example, in essays like After the Catastrophe and The Fight with the Shadow, which can be found in Jung's Collected Works Volume 10, Civilization in Transition, a compendium Peterson cites in Maps of Meaning. Many of the theories that Peterson espouses about Nazism and other forms of authoritarianism are not his. He stole them from Carl Jung. Peterson says that Hitler's oratory was akin to black magic. That's what Jung says. Peterson says that under Hitler, ordinary Germans became possessed. That's what Jung says. Peterson says that in university he had an epiphany, that war was not attributable to economics, but rather psychology. That's what Jung says. Many of the ideas Peterson passes off as his own have been stolen from others.
So you imagine there's all this resentment and hatred brewing underneath the surface, and all this chaos is there, and the desire for order is like clamoring in everyone's minds.
All this chaos is there, and the idea for order is clamoring in everyone's mind. Chaos versus order. And what are the names of Peterson's 2 self-help books? 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos, and Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life. By chaos, Peterson means racial chaos or Jewish chaos. Hitler referred to the Jews as chaos. By order, Peterson means Nazi order.
And Hitler comes along, and he's a very powerful emotional orator.
More praise. Peterson has recurrently emphasized how powerful Hitler was.
And he's watching the crowd, and he listens. And when he says thing A, nothing happens. And when he says thing B, everybody roars. And so he takes note of that. And it's not even conscious exactly, right? Because he's being molded by the crowd. And so they roar. And so so that's a reinforcement. That's a reward. And so then he goes down that line a little bit farther, and they roar some more, and then he tries something else, and it's silent.
He
becomes
like, what they want.
You bet. Yeah. Exactly that, man. He acts out the dark desire of the mob. So he becomes the embodiment of the dark desire of the mob.
Jordan Peterson has become the embodiment of the dark desire of the mob. For instance, if he makes a statement that is extreme and receives applause, as he did in Norway when he criticized the Canadian government for prosecuting a major Nazi organizer named Ernst Zundel, he goes on to make more far-right comments. Also, when anyone challenges him, all he need do is give the signal, for example by claiming that he's been cancelled, and his mob springs into action. His followers are empty vessels, mindless droids. They live vicariously through Peterson, a bully, narcissist, psychopath, schizophrenic, and Nazi.
And that's partly why he had the charisma. It's right, because there's this unconscious fantasy brewing in the back of everyone's minds. You see that to some degree now with Antifa, for example, and their proclivity towards violence. And you ask, just exactly what's going on there?
Yeah, so an anti-fascist organization is bad, but Hitler was good at order, at organizing, at listening to the German people, at fighting in the trenches, at cleaning up factories, at screening citizens for TB, and at having the charisma.
Well, Hitler came to embody the desire of the German people for order and revenge. And he embodied that fully.
Hitler was the genuine article, the complete package.
And you could say, so what happened was a collaboration between him and the people. It wasn't Hitler turned everyone into Nazis. It's no. That's not how it worked.
I'm sure there was a lot of good people still left over who got just overrun by the mania too. Who were disgusted by it.
The other thing too is that, people are not that brave. And everybody thinks, this is one of the things I teach in my Maps of Meaning class. It's like, okay, you look at Nazi Germany in the 30s and you think, well, I'd be one of the heroes who rescued the Jews. It's like, statistically, that's very improbable.
Right.
And one of the things I've learned in the last year with all this strange political, what would you say?
Note how he transitions from boasting about Hitler and talking about how he likes to remind people that they probably wouldn't have helped the Jews, to discussing his career as a public figure. He is linking the topics of Hitler and the Holocaust to himself, as he did when he said he had something in common with Nazis, as he did in Maps of Meaning when he asked, granted the opportunity, how many of us would not be Hitlers, as he did in his self-aggrandizing documentary, The Rise of Jordan Peterson, when he staggered clips of Hitler speaking with clips of himself teaching about how Hitler and the Germans entered into a conspiracy, and as he did in a video he made with Jonathan Pajot called The Metaphysics of Pepe, when he showed, in succession, a picture of the Hitler Youth giving the Sieg Heil, video of the American neo-Nazi Richard B. Spencer and his followers giving each other the Sieg Heil, and video of himself speaking outside the University of Toronto with Lauren Southern in attendance. That would be the woman on the left with the blonde hair. Southern is a Canadian neo-Nazi, a fact recognized by some Canadian politicians. If I draw a line from Peterson to Hitler, this is taboo, over the top, not in good form. But if he connects himself to the Hitlerite faith, that's fine. Indeed, it's so normal, no one appears to see it.
The strange situation that I've been in is how unlikely it is for people to speak up. They just won't. Even tenured professors who are tenured, they're protected. It's like the probability they'll pop their head up and say something that might make them identifiable is very, very low.
He means identifiable as neo-Nazis. Yes, there are others. But then, as I document in my book, Canada has been quite adept at producing neo-Nazi educators, including Paul Frum, James Keegstra, and Malcolm Ross. Keegstra and Ross were backed by the aforementioned neo-Nazi organizer Ernst Zundel, who Peterson defended during a talk in Norway just after relaying what he called a joke about Jews being gassed. The Norwegian audience applauded Peterson's defense of Zundel and his right to make fun of Jews being gassed. But it wasn't like Peterson was turning the Norwegians into Nazis. Goodness no. Instead, they were entering into a conspiracy with one another. Poor Peterson. Innocently, he got tangled up in some strange political situation, and when it comes to the task of publicly praising the Nazis, he has to go it alone. But then, I guess, his is a predicament to be expected, because
it's a very strange story in many ways.
To learn more about this very strange story, I suggest you read The Devil and His Due, How Jordan Peterson Plagiarizes Adolf Hitler. Thank you for listening and watching, and if you found this video compelling or disturbing, please share.